Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. 7 days after that tragic flooding in Texas, at least 121 people have been confirmed dead, while 166 are still missing. Almost a week out from the initial flooding, search and rescue operations have now shifted to a recovery phase as hope of finding survivors dwindles. And with that horrible reality front of mind, we're starting to learn the ways in which the Trump administration failed in its response to that deadly flooding. According to an eye-opening new report, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, the person ultimately in charge of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, delayed the federal response to that deadly flooding for more than 3 days, even as local search and rescue teams raced to find survivors. As you probably have noticed, Kristi Noem has been the center of a number of stories we've reported on, like the nearly 300 people the administration renditioned to a notorious prison in El Salvador, or the National Guard and Marines dispatched to the streets of L.A. and their show of force there, or the militarized ICE raids scooping up your neighbors across the country, or ICE agents arresting a U.S. senator and New York City controller. And throughout all those very serious stories, she has weirdly acted much more like a social media influencer than a cabinet official. She has spent the bulk of her time dressing up, staging political stunts for social media, like the time she dressed like a firefighter during a training drill in Alaska, or the time she wore a life preserver for a photo shoot with the Coast Guard, or when she put on an ice vest and grabbed a gun to record a video for social media, or this infamous image of her posing in front of detainees at that mega prison wearing a $50,000 watch. Kristi Noem is one of the most powerful people in the U.S. government. She has a profoundly important job and responsibility, and her tenure has been enormously destructive through the intentional dismantling of so much about the fabric of this country, but particularly our emergency disaster response infrastructure, which is, of course, critical to disasters like the flooding in Central Texas. Now, back in June, there's a somewhat little noticed item. We learned about a new policy from the secretary, which, get this, required her direct approval of any DHS contract worth more than $100,000. At the time, lots of folks pointed out how absolutely ludicrous that policy was. One outlet, a federal news network, called it, quote, absolutely nuts in a headline. The Daily Kos warned that Noem's DHS disaster could wreck FEMA. I mean, we're talking about an agency that routinely spends billions of dollars on disaster relief. $100,000 is pennies in comparison to what FEMA needs to be able to spend quickly. It was obvious to anyone that knows anything about disaster relief that requiring the secretary's personal approval would create an enormous bottleneck and delay in a situation where time is of the essence. That is exactly what happened. According to a new report citing multiple FEMA sources, Secretary Noem did not sign off on deploying the agency's urban search and rescue team to Texas until this Monday, more than 3 days after the flood struck. Now, you might be wondering what Secretary Noem was doing over that holiday weekend. It turns out on Sunday, one day before finally signing off on the FEMA funding, as search and rescue efforts were frantically ongoing on the ground there, and the clock was ticking to find survivors, Noem did take the time to go to Instagram to generate some audience engagement. Quote, which one do you like for the official governor's portrait to hang in the South Dakota State Capitol? Thank you, David Ewell. Which portrait of herself should be displayed in her old capital? This portrait of Noem on horseback? Or this portrait of Noem on horseback? Or perhaps this portrait of Noem on horseback? When pressed about this reporting on Fox News, Secretary Noem didn't exactly deny it.
CNN is basically got a report accusing you of slowing the process. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, there you go. Fake news. CNN, again, is absolutely trash what they are doing by saying that, because our Coast Guard, our Border Patrol, BORTAC teams were there immediately. Every single thing I was on, they asked for, we were there.
Well, that's not a denial, right? Because it was the search and rescue teams at issue, and it wasn't that they were denied authorization. It's that it came 3 days late. Noem probably doesn't need to worry about her job. I would worry about my own conscience, actually. But she doesn't need to worry about her job. Her boss thinks she's doing a, how would we call it, a heck of a job, to coin a phrase. In fact, her boss just spoke to NBC News' Kristen Welker about it. We don't have a recording, but here's the transcript of what he said when Welker asked, there are these reports that have come out that Secretary Noem I guess, had to have signed off on FEMA expenditures, and they may have delayed some of the response. Trump responds, quote, "I don't know anything about it. We were right on time. We were there. In fact, she was the first one I saw on television. She was there right from the beginning, and when she would not have needed anything, she had the right to do it, but she was literally the first person I saw on television that morning when we all woke up and saw this tragedy that took place during the evening, and she was right on the ball. She's done a great job." She was on TV. So obviously she's doing a great job, right? So good of a job, in fact, that this week she canceled, listen to this, she canceled a $3 million grant that was dedicated to attempting to create a kind of state-of-the-art system that would be able to warn local communities quickly when extreme weather arrives, including in sort of granular detail about which specific areas might be subject to the highest risk. That is even though just a couple of days ago she conceded that our infrastructure is in need of an upgrade in order to give folks adequate warning ahead of natural disasters.
We know that everybody wants more warning time, and that's why we're working to upgrade the technologies that have been neglected by far too long to make sure that families have as much advance notice as possible.
Well, they didn't have as much advance notice as possible, and the grant that was studying how to do it, you just canceled. The thing is, Secretary Noem fundamentally believes that the federal government, and by extension herself, doesn't manage federal disasters. So, not our problem.
We as a federal government don't manage these disasters. The state does. We come in and support them. And that's exactly what we did here in this situation.
New Jersey Senator Andy Kim is a ranking member of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Disaster Management. This week, he sent a letter to Secretary Noem demanding the release of her plan for the current hurricane season, and he joins me now. Senator, I want to start with you on that last clip from the Secretary, which is in line with something that the President has articulated. It is a fundamental redirection here. They want to essentially get rid of FEMA and just take the federal government out of disaster response. What do you think of that idea?
Well, you see right now what happens when we have incompetence in terms of leadership at the federal level. No state is going to be able to account for every single possible disaster that's out there and have the resources available in that kind of way to deploy quickly. You know, we need experts. We need people that understand how to be able to respond, be able to anticipate, and be able to have the data to be able to engage. And right now you see somebody who's more interested in doing what I call performative governance rather than actually leading, actually taking the steps. So I really think that, look, there are definitely reforms that need to be made to FEMA. We experienced some challenges when we came to Superstorm Sandy years ago in New Jersey, but that doesn't mean that we just wipe it all out and completely get rid of it. That would be a disaster for our country, and we're seeing some of that problem unfolding right now.
I got to say, I've covered a lot of natural disasters through the years, Superstorm Sandy being one, and hurricanes and droughts and things like that. It is a little weird that the acting administrator from FEMA has no experience in emergency management, doesn't seem to know that there's a hurricane season, maybe he was joking, maybe not, and has said bupkis while they're gutting the agency in the aftermath of this and as we prepare for hurricane season.
Yeah, and also, where is he right now? Like, has anyone actually seen him since this disaster in Texas? I mean, you know, we have a completely absent FEMA acting administrator. And he was not joking that he didn't know when hurricane season was. And actually, when I was doing a nomination hearing of another senior leader of DHS, I asked them, when is hurricane season? They didn't know what timetable was. And look, as we're getting into it, I mean, NOAA, our own National Weather Service, is saying that we could expect upwards of 19 named tropical storms, including upwards of 5 Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes. This is something that's not theoretical in terms of the worry that my state, New Jersey, and up and down the coast is facing. And when we see this kind of incompetence in the response to what's happening in Texas and the horrible tragedy there, it leaves a lot of people in my state and around this country very nervous about what's to come.
You know, this policy they'd announced, which I think anyone, you don't even have to be in government, have to understand, like the bottleneck you're going to create if the one person at the top has to approve grants at this very small level. When you're talking about the budget of the agency, I want to read from the letter you wrote about your concerns about this policy as it relates to hurricane season. You say the reports of FEMA's incomplete hurricane season plan on the cusp of the start of the hurricane season and the slowness in providing the plan to the committee are unsettling. Any such plan must detail how FEMA's life-saving missions will not be hindered by your recent directive, requiring all department obligations over $100,000 be reviewed and approved by your prior to obligation, especially since the memorandum stated your office would take a minimum of 5 days to complete each review. Yeah. This added layer of bureaucracy threatens to delay work that can mean the difference between life and death for disaster victims. Do you think, is this policy still in place as far as you understand it?
As far as I understand it, which is one of the stupidest decisions and policies I've ever heard of, especially when it comes to disaster response. And for an administration that tries to talk about red tape, they are adding red tape here. They are adding bureaucracy. They're making it harder for us to be able to deploy and be able to get resources out. And that's the most serious when it comes to responding to disasters. So, yes, I'm very concerned that if a hurricane hits, certainly if it hits my state in New Jersey, are we going to have to be begging Kristi Noem to be able to get off Instagram to be able to actually go and do her job of trying to approve resources that our state and our country needs so badly. This is a terrible idea to bottleneck. We should be able to pre-position resources. We should give freedom for our disaster response experts to be able to handle this. You know, that is why we have this organization. And especially the minimum 5-day notice that it's going to take for them to be able to approve these, you know, that just shows how it's slowing everything down.